Hello and welcome. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Michaela.
We're so glad you're here.
And if you're new here, we just want to give you a little bit of what to expect about our service today. We're going to start with worship, then we'll have a few announcements, we'll have a question of the day, and then we'll take it off to Pastor Mark.
So let's get things started with the time of worship. However you're watching or wherever you are, we just want to encourage you to engage. Gather those around you. Stand up. Raise your hands. Sing aloud. Let's set the tone and allow God's presence to fill our homes as we begin this service.
Come, let us worship our King. Come, let us bow at His feet. He has done great things. See what our Savior has done. See how His love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. Hero of heaven, you conquered the grave. You free every captive, you break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awakens alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You've been faithful through every storm. You'll be faithful forevermore. You have done great things, and I know you will do it again. For your promise is yes and amen. You will do great things. God, you do great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquered the grave. You free every captive, you break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awakens alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. Hallelujah, God, above it all, and hallelujah, God, unshakable, and hallelujah, you have done great things. Hallelujah, God, above it all, and hallelujah, God, unshakable, and hallelujah, you have done great things. You've done great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquered the grave. You free every captive, you break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awaken to life. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great things. You have done great things. Oh God, you do great things.
Sing There's a Table. There's a table that you've prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you've shed for me, and this is how I find my battles. There's a table that you've prepared for me in the presence of my enemies. It's your body and your blood you've shed for me. This is how I fight my battles. Sing I. And I believe you'll overcome, and I will lift my song of praise for all you've done. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how I fight my battles. This is how. In the valley, I know that you're with me, and surely your goodness and mercy follow me. didn't. You didn't want heaven without us. So Jesus, you brought heaven down. Oh yeah, my sin was great, your love was greater. And what could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is.
is no one like you. You have no equal. There is none that can stand before you. And God, you are for us. So who can stand against us? God, let us remember that in our day-to-day lives, that when we look to you, when we rely on you, you're going to take care of things. You're going to hold on to us. God, thank you that we can rely on that and rely on your promise that you will not leave us or forsake us. We thank you for all these things in your Son's name. Amen.
Another act of worship for us is giving. If you are a guest with us this morning, please do not feel pressure to give. But if Pursuit is your church home and this is a part of your worship, there will be a link in the comments, or you can visit pursuitcommunity.church/give.
We also have a service opportunity that's coming up where the community center is partnering with Loaves and Fishes to offer free lunches and dinners every weekday throughout the summer. Now, they're looking for 2 volunteers to help stock and hand out food from 11:45 to 1 p.m. every weekday. So there's a sign-up form in the comments or in the weekly email that you receive from the Pursuit office. You can sign up for a day or as many days as you want, whatever really works for your schedule. This is a great way for us to love on the people in the neighborhood and really to help out the community center.
I love it. So cool. Guys, I am so excited. We will be meeting in person again, finally, on July 12th at the park across from the street from the community center. We are so excited to begin the transition back to meeting in person, but we want to make sure that we are as safe as possible while we do that. So we will be meeting outside at a park. We hope to see you there. So mark your calendars July 12th and stay tuned, be alert for what's to come for more information.
Great, that's so exciting. And now that brings us to our question of the day. What is something you cannot live without?
We'd love to hear your answers in the comments section. For me, I feel like I cannot live without community or people. Quarantine has been really hard to be able to deal with that. Thankfully, I've had Chris, my fiance, around so I can actually communicate with someone in person. But yeah, I've just learned that I need people. How about you, Michaela?
Yeah, I'm similar to you, extrovert, so I get it.
Yeah.
But one thing I can't live without is shredded cheese. You always got to have a drawer full of shredded cheese because you just don't know when you're going to need it for a meal. So I always make sure it's fully loaded.
That's awesome. Okay, so we also asked our youth group the question this week. So let's take a look at their answers.
My name is Caitlin, and something I can't live without would be my contacts because I'm really blind. I need them to see.
One thing I can't live without is my phone because they basically have like everything and you can like do basically everything on them.
Special K because I eat it like all the time.
Why is it so good?
Don't know. It's just healthy.
I think I couldn't live without people because I'm a major extrovert. Sleep because otherwise I get like really tired and grumpy.
One thing I can't live without is s'mores. Why? Because they're s'mores.
Can't live without electronics because first off they have my schedule. I learned a lot about it and they give me fun times. My heart because it aches.
I cannot live without sweets or baking because why go through life without having some nice things to eat and enjoy.
I can't live without my dogs because they're nice and they're better than people.
My wife, because I love her so much, and not because she was pointing at herself right then.
Well, hey, Pursuit. Nice to be with you again this evening, morning, depending on when you're watching our feed here. I just wanted to, before I get into my sermon, just mention again that opportunity that we have to work with the community center and do the food distribution is an easy way to serve, slam dunk. It's an opportunity for us to show up for the community center every day during the summer. And I've seen it. It's not a big deal. You basically go in, you take these pans of food, you put them out on the table, people pull up, they grab them, then you go and put more out. It's kind of an easy thing. Most of the time you're probably sitting and hanging out with somebody else that you bring with you, and takes only a couple hours, and so it's a pretty easy way to serve. And it's a chance for us to continue to grow our relationship with the community center. So I know I'll be doing it a bunch of times, but if you have a chance to go out and look at that Sign Up Genius and find days where you could potentially take a couple hours in the middle of the day and go and serve, that'd be great. It's an easy serve for kids. You can bring a kid with you or your family. It'd be a great opportunity, I think, for us as a church. So go ahead and look for that, sign up for that. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and get us started into our sermon. And we're picking up the Joseph story. We've just ended with Joseph in Potiphar's house. And it's a kind of a weird situation. I was trying to think about it this week, how this possibly could have looked, right? With Joseph, coming into slavery, being in the house of such an important person, and kind of rising to power within that house, having everything under his control. He's basically the COO of Potiphar's house, and he's running everything. And it said really Potiphar didn't have to worry about anything in his home except for what he ate, which I think probably was a big deal. It was a really powerful person, and it was a really powerful position. But you wonder, like, how do you rise as a slave? How do you move up the ladder as a slave? And what would that look like today as we look at him? He's going to be in jail, same exact thing. He goes from just being a regular person in jail to rising up the ladder in jail and having all kinds of authority given to him as a prisoner, which is just a really strange thing to think about. And I always think about it like in movies, like the way it would look in a movie. And I kind of feel like it would be a montage of things happening where, Joseph shows up the first day and he doesn't even know the language. He doesn't know what's going on. But, everything that he's given, he's faithful in. Every single thing that he does, he's faithful in. So he cleans the best, and he does every task they give him the best, and he leads people the best, and he continues to just overachieve and be faithful in every task he's given. And there's something about it that's just kind of amazing to me. And I was just thinking a lot about this week, and this doesn't exactly apply to today's sermon, but it was just something I wanted to encourage you with. It's like wherever you find yourself is a chance to be faithful in that season. And I know a lot of times we make excuses why we can't be faithful right now. It's like, I can't be faithful right now financially in giving to the church because I need that raise, or we need some things to change in our financial situation, or I don't really make anything, so I can't really give anything. Well, it's like being faithful now is the best predictor of future faithfulness. If you say, I'm going to be faithful in my relationship with my girlfriend or boyfriend when I get married, well, why can't you be faithful now? If you say, I'm going to be faithful to God once I get out of college, these 4 years I'm going to live loose and go crazy and do whatever I want, but once I get out of college, that really just doesn't ever happen. The question is if you can be faithful in the season you're in right now, even when you feel some of those limitations. And for Joseph, he's faithful as a slave. He's going to today be faithful as a prisoner. He's not waiting for his situation to change, his circumstances to change, for him to have more available to him, for him to have more money or more power or anything. He's going to be faithful in every task he's given. And that's one of those things that I think God is calling us to do. No matter what season of life that you are in, no matter how limited you feel in that season, there's always a chance for you to be faithful. And if you expect or want to be faithful someday, well, someday starts now. The best predictor of your future faithfulness is your current faithfulness. There's a nice little tweet for you if you're interested. But I felt like that kind of stuck out to me as I was processing last week's sermon and thinking about where we're going with today. And today we're going to really talk about, honestly, perseverance, on pushing through, and even when things are a little bit disappointing, finding a way to continue to be the faithful, to live in a faithful way. And so we ended up with Joseph being falsely accused in Potiphar's house, being put into prison. And this is what it says about him. It says, but while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness. He granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So God is with Joseph. He's showing him kindness. He's granting him favor. And as a prisoner, it says, so the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success whenever he did. So you find him as a regular person in the jail, rising up to be in charge of the entire thing, of the warden trusting him in the same way that Potiphar trusted him, of him showing his trustworthiness, of him showing his faithfulness, of him showing his righteousness. And, it's clear to everyone around him that it's God doing this through him. It's not just him doing it in his own strength, but it's God doing this through him, that they see God at work in him in these moments. And so the question is just, what season of life are you in, and where are you not being as faithful as you could be? Because we don't necessarily need excuses to sometimes slack on being faithful. We just kind of expect someday we'll get around to it. And that wasn't the way that Joseph lived. Joseph lived as a faithful person in every situation that he was in. So let me just pray, and then we'll go ahead and get to today's passage. Would you pray with me? God, thank you for a chance to study your word this morning. We just pray that you would change the way that we think, that you would change the way that we live, that you would use this passage this morning to help us think about your word, be in your word, understand what you're doing in our lives, and that we would change the way that we live based on what we learn in your word this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're going to be picking up the story in Genesis chapter 40, coming off a nice montage as Joseph finds his way to be in charge of an entire prison system. And we pick up the story with Genesis chapter 40, verse 1, where it says, sometime later, which is funny because it's telling you that Joseph has now been in jail for a time. I don't know how long it takes for a regular prisoner to rise up to a place where he's running the entire jail. I don't know how long it takes for a slave to go from being a regular slave to being in charge of the entire household. But I know that Joseph has now been struggling for some time. He's been in a situation he didn't want to be in, sold into slavery by his brothers, basically written off by his family, and been in this situation in both places in heartbreaking situations where some time has passed, right? So Genesis chapter 40, verse 1, sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. So Joseph is it's a weird spot because he's in charge of other prisoners. He's attending, almost like serving these two other prisoners. And I would assume that Joseph, again, was doing this in a faithful way, doing the best job that he could, not just trying to keep people alive in the prison, but actually trying to care for them, serve them. It seems like that's consistent with his character. And it's kind of weird that he's put in charge of someone else, but also put into a servant's role in that case. He's attending to them, seeing that their well-being is kept intact. And what Joseph hasn't done up to this point is made any excuses. He has not played the victim. He has not allowed his circumstances to define his situation, which I think would have been easy. And I think everyone reading the story probably would have given him a pass on. We probably would have said, hey, if anyone can play the victim here, if anyone can allow their circumstances to define their joy, to define their situation, to define how they see God, to define how they act or how they behave, we would have probably all given a pass to Joseph. And to be honest with you, probably a lot of people, a lot of Old Testament characters that we had thrown into the same situation probably would have been, complaining and grumbling and being a victim. I think probably a lot of us, if we had thrown ourselves into a situation like Joseph, probably would have complained and grumbled and become a victim. But Joseph hasn't done that. He hasn't played a victim. He hasn't made any excuses. He's just been faithful in every task, faithful in every moment, faithful in how he's persevered in these situations. And I asked the question when I started to look at this, is like, why? Well, why does Joseph do this? Like, what is it about Joseph that makes him this way? And you could just say, well, this is personality. He's just designed this way. He has a personality like this. We all know people like this. These are the people that probably have learned like 5 languages over the quarantine time. Like they learn how to play like a couple instruments. They're like world beaters. They like can't sit still. They do everything. They do it to the most amazing ability. They're people that you probably look at and you just kind of like roll your eyes at. Like, I mean, if you're really honest with yourself, you're probably jealous about how productive they are just generally in life. So we could say, well, maybe he's just got one of those personalities. But I think it's a lot deeper than that. I believe Joseph knows that God is going to follow through on the dream that he gave him before all this began. I think Joseph, the thing that's sustaining him through this entire thing is that he knows that God gave him a dream and showed him that his family would bow down to him. And somehow, even though he seems to be taking a step away and a step away and a step away and getting further and further away from that thing happening, it seems like his faith continues to persevere, that God will do what God has said he will do, that these dreams that Joseph experienced were real. They were legit. They were something that he is hanging on to. And you have to go back to the faith that he had seen in his family. And look, nobody nobody in his family was perfect, but there is these elements, these seeds of faith that he could see. And, you go all the way back to his great-grandfather, Abraham, right? And Abraham is sort of this father of faith. If you look in Hebrews, it talks about all these people who really showed you what faith looked like. And Abraham has one of the longest sections. It talks about Abraham when he was called to go. He had no idea where he was going to go, and he went. Later on, he was told that he would have a child in his old age. And even though his wife laughed that one off because they were too old to have children, he believed, and God gave him a son. And then, God calls him to sacrifice his son, Isaac. And you think, like, this is one of those moments where I think a lot of people have a hard time handling the Bible because they think, well, how could a good person like Abraham go to sacrifice his son? And back in that day, human sacrifice was something that the small g gods did. It was like the things that the Amalekites did with the god Molech, or you could see some of this in other like little regional religions that were based around these gods who were like made by human hands, right? And so there was a big difference between this God who loved his creation and this other God who you would sacrifice your children to in a really horrific way. And so when God calls Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, when you're reading this story, you're thinking, Abraham's a terrible human for trying to do this. Why is God asking him to do this? Doesn't this seem like it's a terrible situation and a terrible story? And you read it and you go, what kind of God? I don't even want to serve this God. He doesn't seem good. Why would he ask Abraham to do this? But as you read through the story, what you realize is that you're seeing a foreshadowing of Jesus. You're seeing a foreshadowing of what God would do with his own son, that he would sacrifice his own son for the sins of the world. And what it says in Hebrews about Abraham is that he took it step by step, was faithful in every moment. God says, hey, wake up early, get Isaac ready. Hey, go collect enough wood for a fire. Hey, go and strap him down to an altar. Okay, and you got Abraham raising a knife to go ahead and sacrifice his son, and you're thinking, I could never do that. Not with my kids, no way. How could Abraham do that? But this is what it says in Hebrews. And it's just a quick little note. It says, it's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. So it says, God was looking to see that faith on display, and God wanted to see what Abraham would do. But more than anything else, God was giving us a foreshadowing of Christ coming someday and what it would look like for a father to sacrifice a son. And he said, he who embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. And so Abraham was holding on to this promise that God said, I will make sure that I fulfill the promises that I've made to you through Isaac. When I told you that I'm going to make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, as numerous as the grains of sand on a seashore, you need to understand that this will happen through the person of Isaac. Okay? And then when he told him to go and sacrifice Isaac to him, Abraham still had faith that this promise would be fulfilled. This is what the next little bit says. It says, Abraham reasoned. So this is Abraham thinking this through and having faith. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the dead. So Abraham had so much faith in what God's promises were, right, that he was willing to sacrifice Isaac, and he reasoned that God, because he can't not fulfill the promises that he had promised to Abraham, would still somehow fulfill those promises, even if he was obedient in a crazy way. Now, we know the full story, because then God sort of spares Isaac from having to go through that and brings them another offering of an animal that gets stuck in a thicket, and so they go and they do that. The whole image is an image of what Christ would go through and what God would be doing through Christ, and so we understand why that's there. But I think Joseph, if I could get back to Joseph's story, I believe that he had faith. He had faith in what he had known from his ancestors. He had faith because he knew that his ancestors believed the promises that God had made them, that they had had dreams, that they had had visions, that they had encounters with God. They had, God had made a covenant with them, and all of these stories were shared through their culture. The way that they would continue on and share all these stories is that it would be like an oral culture. So essentially what would happen is every night, the kids would join up around a campfire with mom and dad, and they would tell stories. And Joseph would grow up hearing, hey, Dad, tell us again about your our great grandfather Abraham. Hey God, or hey Dad, hey, tell us about Isaac. Tell us about his life and how, what he went through and what he did. Hey, tell us those stories again about how you encountered God in your life, right? And so Joseph would have heard all these stories, and he would have understood that this God follows through on what he says he'll do, and he would have had faith in this God who doesn't break his promises. Even when it seems like those promises won't be fulfilled, right? When Abraham's too old to have a child, God still comes through and makes a miracle to see those things happen. Joseph would have been sitting there as a slave going, I don't know how one day my family's going to bow to me, but I know that God gave me that dream, and I have faith that what he's going to do is he's going to fulfill this. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I know I'm further away than I was, a week ago. But right now, I'm going to continue to be faithful in the season that I'm in because I believe in God's promise. I believe that he is faithful. I believe that he loves me. I believe that he is for me. And I believe all these promises because, he gave me these dreams. He promised me these things. And he's done this through generations in my own family. And so there are times when we start to look at this story and we think, well, how in the world could he have been faithful in these moments? And what you realize is that he had a faith. He didn't have a Bible. He didn't have a temple to worship at. But what he had was the oral traditions of his family. And he heard the stories of faithfulness, that God was faithful to his great-grandfather, his grandfather, his father, and now would be faithful to him. And so, yeah, maybe his personality was one that was just a really amazing manager who did everything well. We know these people. But I do believe that he had a faith that was built upon the history that his family had had with God and how God had come through for them generation after generation after generation. As Christians, we have a Bible. It shows us God's promises to us. We have a church around us and community around us to remind us of what those promises are, to show us what they look like to be lived out. We're in an infinitely better situation than Joseph, and we can take some of that, what we see in Joseph, and we can apply it even better here because now I know what God's promises are. I understand how much he loves me. I understand how he's with me. I see it working out in the lives of other people. And I might find myself in a season where I want to make excuses and I want to, put off being faithful to another season. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to believe his promises, and I'm going to believe his promises, and I'm going to be faithful in the season that I'm in. And so that's what we see Joseph doing. And so the story goes on, verse 4. After they had been in custody, the cupbearer and the baker, for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream on the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. And when Joseph came in the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" Which, by the way, is just another way of looking at how awesome of a leader he is, because he's honestly caring for these guys. He's not just keeping them alive. He's not just making sure they have what they need to be sustained, but he's caring for them. And it's not normal in his prison that he runs for prisoners to have sad, dejected faces, apparently. This sticks out to him. And he's paying attention, and he's essentially ministering to them. Hey, I see that something's going on with you. I'm paying attention to you. I care about you. Why don't you tell me what's happening? Which is kind of an amazing way of looking at how he was running this jail in this moment. It's pretty crazy. He goes on with verse 8. "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on that vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed. Its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup in his hand." Now, we've talked about how important dreams are to Joseph, and when he catches the idea that they both had dreams on the same night, he understands God is doing something. He probably looks at this and says, wow, maybe God is doing something for me. Maybe God's brought these guys here, given them dreams, given me an opportunity to work in their lives so that this might go somewhere for me. Maybe I'll receive justice. Maybe I'll get closer to fulfilling the dream that God gave me, that one day my whole family would bow down to me, right? That one day even my parents would bow down to me. And so Joseph decides to tell him what the dream is going to be. He's going to interpret the dream for him. Now, again, if Joseph was playing the victim, he would say something like, dude, let me just tell you, dreams are not all they are cracked up to be. You don't want dreams. Last time I had a dream, let me tell you what happened. I had a dream. I told everybody what it was. Then they took me, sold me into slavery, put a bunch of goat blood on my coat, took it home to my dad, told him I was dead. And now here I am stuck in first I was a slave, and now I'm a prisoner in Egypt. Your dream might actually take you to a place you don't want to go, right? But no, he doesn't do that. In fact, he basically says, these dreams come from God. The interpretations belong to God. God is up to something. We can figure out what he's up to based on what he's giving us. His response was, I have your answers, but it's not me, it's God. So this is what it means, he said, verse 12. Joseph said to him, the 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head, restore you to your position, will put Pharaoh's cup in your hand, just as you used to when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon. Okay, so he gives him this amazing interpretation. Hey, this is looking good. And I can just imagine, the other prisoners gathering around, and they're, hey, tell us what's the dream mean, right? And they're hurraying and they're excited. They're like, they're fist bumping and, maybe they're elbow bumping if there's a quarantine going on. I don't know what's going on during that day. And they're thankful to God. They think this is great news. Hey, looks like cupbearer's getting out. Andy Dufresne's going to stay in jail over here, but cupbearer's getting out. No, Megan? No? Okay, just me. And so very exciting interpretation. Everybody's pumped. And then Joseph thinks, God's brought these people here so that maybe they can have an audience with the Pharaoh and bring me up and go, yo, listen, Pharaoh, this guy in prison, Joe, he told me all about this before it was going to happen. He told me I had a dream. He interpreted the dream. He told me his God is the one that gave him the interpretation. He's a really cool dude. You should check him out. Here's all his deets. Go check him out. Go figure out where he's at. Get him involved because he's the man. He runs a tight ship in that prison. Everybody seems to be happy all the time. He's giving out these great interpretations. It's excellent. And Joseph is able to share the interpretation with the cupbearer, and it's great. And so, of course, the baker's like, cool, we're giving out great interpretations today. All right, do me next. Let me share my dream with you. So when the chief baker, this is verse 16, when the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread. In the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head. Okay, so Joseph's like, cool. Let me ask God what the interpretation is. He says, this is what it means. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale you on your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away at your flesh. Wah, wah. That's like probably not, I'm guessing everybody was like, hey, cool, the cupbearer. Oh, man, the baker is going to be impaled. That's not good. That's not looking real good. I want you to know sometimes, and this is weirdly a high value for our church, sometimes telling the truth is really hard. I would imagine, as Joseph's listening to this story, or this dream, and he's interpreting it, there's probably part of him that doesn't want to give the interpretation. There's probably part of him that wants to go, well, we'll see how that one works out, man. Probably, I could be wrong. I'm not really sure, but, probably not so good. Probably maybe not as good as the other one, but instead, Joseph gives him the whole truth, 100% of it. And I want you to know, this is, I believe, a biblical value. It's definitely a personal value for me. I believe it's a value at our church to share really deeply and to tell the truth and to tell the whole truth. It's definitely a value on our staff. We talk about it all the time, that we're going to tell the truth in love, that we're going to care about one another enough to make sure that we're being honest and telling everybody the full truth, everything that they need to hear. And I think as Christians, sometimes we shy away from this. And I could also, if I could speak as Minnesotans, I think we kind of shy away from this. We don't always want to tell the full truth. I saw this play out quite a bit when I was a youth pastor, and I would get interns from the local college. And this happened a couple times where I get an intern, and they were 2 years, 3 years into finishing a degree, sometimes in their senior year, finishing a degree in youth ministry. We're investing $120,000 into this degree, and they weren't cut out to be youth pastors. Let me talk about an awkward conversation to have with someone. It's like, hey, I've had you around for a little while. You don't have the passion for it. You don't have the giftings for it. This doesn't seem like something God would call you to, because he would gift you for it and he would give you the passion for it, and you should be further along in your process to become, I think, and I would sit down with some of them and be like, listen, I think if you continue on in this major, you're going to get to the end of college. You're going to not have enough skills to be a youth pastor. You're going to need to pay back all of these loans, and you're not going to be able to find a job in this industry. And maybe God's calling you to something else. And some of those conversations were just unbearably difficult to have. But in every single one of those situations, my motivation in that conversation was like, hey, I just don't want you to have the train wreck coming in another couple years when you didn't see it happening. I want to make sure that, honestly, in this moment, what's best for you is for you to see it now, as much as it might hurt. And sometimes we're called to tell hard truths. We're called to sit down and have the conversation with somebody that nobody wants to have. We're called to say things to them that nobody wants to say. And it's a way to actually love someone, to tell them everything that they need to hear. And I think one of the things that you have to think about when you're thinking about sharing the truth with somebody is, what is your motivation behind it? If your motivation is, I want the best for them. I'm not trying to score points. I'm not trying to be vindictive. I'm not trying to punish somebody. But if I see that it's the best for them to understand something that's really difficult, to sit down and have that conversation with them, then that's when I go that extra part of the truth that really hurts to say. And it's something that, yes, I'm a truth teller, so I'm definitely probably more of a prophet sometimes than I am as a pastor. But I want you to know what drives me to be that honest with people and to look you in the eye and tell you what it is that nobody else wants to tell you that you really need to hear is driven from a place of love. It's driven from a place of wanting the best from you. I hope that value you're seeing throughout our church, because people so desperately want the best outcome for people that they're willing to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. The dysfunction that I see all the time in marriages, in families, in small groups is really people who aren't willing to share the real truth with somebody because they're afraid. And in reality, what they're doing is creating a way worse situation where there's going to be a train wreck down the road that'll derail everything. When we have those Thanksgiving meals where we sit around and nobody wants to talk about anything, and the first time someone mentions something, somebody's up and running out the door because there's conflict, that's the end point of something that wasn't dealt with when it needed to be dealt with way ahead. And so Joseph gives a very hard truth in a very matter-of-fact fashion. Hey, here's what it says, man. You got 3 days. This isn't going to end well for you. This is what God is telling me to interpret this dream as. And I know this isn't what you want to hear, but this is the truth. This is what it is. I think God is calling us to be these truth tellers in people's lives, but doing it in a way that is loving. We're not called to be jerks. We're not called to be mean. We're not called to be terrible people who are vindictive. We're called to tell the truth in love, to say the whole truth in love. It goes on. Verse 20. Now the third day was Pharaoh's birthday, which makes sense with the dreams coming 3 days before that. And he gave a feast for all of his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of his officials. So he lifts up the cupbearer's head and says, hey, you're back to being what you should be. And he lifts off the head of his baker. Says he restored the chief cupbearer to his position. So they once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hands, but he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. And then we come to what I think is just an absolutely heartbreaking final verse to this chapter, because what has happened here seems like God has sent someone who will have direct access to Pharaoh into a situation where Joseph can make a difference in this person's life, and that they can then go and advocate for him in with Pharaoh. And you're thinking, okay, something's happening, Because you know what we're seeing here is that Joseph is this faithful person who perseveres, who is a good person, and what should happen to him is something good. We should have seen already something good happen to this person who doesn't seem like they deserve any of this that's happened, right? And so you think how this should end is, and then the cupbearer, after he was reestablished, went to the king and said, hey, you've got to go meet Joe. Here's the story. He interpreted my dream. He told me exactly what's going to happen. He honors his God. He's faithful in everything he does. He's an amazing manager. He can do incredible things for you. I think you'll think as highly of him as I do. You should go check him out. But that's not how it ends. Look at the last verse. It says, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. And of course, he didn't forget Joseph. He forgot him in the way of not saying anything to the Pharaoh, in the way of not honoring the request that Joseph had made to, hey, when you get there, when you get back restored, remember me. He didn't remember him. He just decided that he was going to not stick his neck out again. He was not going to play these cards with Pharaoh, that he was just going to be okay with everything, how it worked out. And you think something good is deserved in Joseph's situation. And I think sometimes we can think this way. And this is kind of a dangerous thing because we start to actually think a little bit around the idea that actually is kind of an evil thing. We say, okay, you're a good person. You deserve good things to happen to you. Or you put out good energy into this world, good things are going to come back to you. Or, hey, if you're a faithful person or you persevere or you do good things, then you're not going to deal with difficulties in life or you're not going to deal with sickness. You're not going to deal with people in your life like dying on you. You're not going to deal with financial hardships. You're going to have this blessed, really good, awesome life. And what that really translates to is actually us not having faith in a God who's in control, but us believing in essentially karma, essentially saying, hey, if you're good, good things should happen to you. If you do this right, and if you're faithful, and if you do the right thing, good things should happen to you. And the thing is, we don't see this anywhere in Scripture. This idea is actually evil, right? If you say that you're good and good things should happen to you, then what you're really saying is that when bad things happen to someone, it's happening because they're terrible people. What you're saying to somebody who gets cancer is, hey, you must have done something wrong. Or what you're saying to somebody who goes through financial difficulty is that, hey, you must be suffering because of your own sin in your life, that what you're receiving back is mirroring how you are living in your life. This is the way they thought in the New Testament sometimes, when somebody would be a beggar and they would have a disease that would, keep them out of the culture there and on the edge of the temple, and they'd be, begging all the time. They'd say, hey, what did this person or their parents do that caused them to be this sick? And that way of thinking can be evil. It can really blame someone who's a victim, can blame them for their own difficulty they're going through. That's not the way the world works. Our world is so damaged and messed up because of our own sin. Right? The sin that's entered into this world through each of us, choosing selfishness, choosing sin in our own right, has caused this world to degrade. It's caused it to create evil. It's caused it to bring in all kinds of things that shouldn't be part of the world that God would want to see or that he designed. And yet, this is the world we live in. In fact, the Bible tells us that we shouldn't expect to live this, charmed life where everything goes perfectly. I mean, Paul is pretty much telling the disciples, hey, you're going to be persecuted. You're going to go through difficult times. And we see it in the life of Joseph here being put on display. Hey, you could do everything right and still you might deal with some hardship or difficulty. And even when you deal with those things, if your faith is tied to things going right or your circumstances changing, then you become a victim of your circumstances where you don't have the faith that you need. You can't lean on that relationship with God because you're distrusting him because of the things going on in your own life. And it's a really difficult spiral that we can find ourselves in. But we read things in Scripture. At the end of the story, we're going to read that Joseph, at the end of his life, is going to say, God used every one of these experiences to make me into who I am so that I could save the world. We see in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, that have been called according to his purposes. God is using everything in your life, good things, bad things, awesome times, difficult times, moments of triumph, moments of just pain and loss. All of these things are creating something in you. It can create someone who has even more distrust for God because you just can't get beyond how difficult things could possibly happen to you, because somewhere deep down in your psyche you feel like that you didn't deserve what happened to you, or it doesn't seem fair. And to be honest, God's going to still use those things to refine your character and turn you into the person that you need to be. And what God is doing here is he's building a man that'll be faithful to him, one that'll do exactly what needs to be done, one that will save the world at some point here. He goes from being kind of a punk 17-year-old who's full of himself, who's not sure how to relate to his family, who's in all kinds of, and he goes from being this person who's probably not worthy, to being in these situations where he's dealing with all of these difficult moments, and it's building this incredible character in him. And this character takes time, it takes perseverance, it takes faith, even when things are hard. What we're seeing is God's using all of this. And we're going to see this more fully at the end of the story. But I want to just talk to you for a second. If you're finding yourself in a really low moment, where you're still struggling with difficulty that's happened to you either recently or in the past couple of years, at some point you have to step back and you have to decide if you're going to be faithful in this season, even when it's not working out exactly the way that you want, whether you're still going to have faith in a God who is good, who loves you, who wants the best for you, even when it seems like he didn't prevent that terrible thing from happening to you. And you have to trust and have faith that what he's doing is building something in you that you'll see in fruition later on in your life, down the road, as you continue to persevere, as you continue to push on with what it means to be a follower of Jesus, as you continue to let him mold you and shape you and turn you into the person that he wants you to be. And I know that is an unbelievably difficult thing to do, because sometimes you're just in so much pain that you're just like, I just can't. And nobody would blame Joseph if he played the victim, if he just packed it in, if he decided not to be faithful, if he was like, forget this. Nobody here knows me. Nobody here knows my God. Nobody here knows how I should act. I'm just going to do the very bare minimum. I'm just going to coast by. I'm just going to survive this. I'm just going to, not stick my head up, not do anything significant, and I'm just going to continue to exist here and be mad at God for what he's done in my life. But that's not what he's doing. He's remembering the stories of his family. He's remembering how God was faithful to his great-grandfather, or to his grandfather, to his great-grandfather's grandfather, his father. He's remembering who he is, who he is in his relationship with God. He's remembering the things that God has promised him. He's remembering who God is. He's finding God's favor even in places where it doesn't seem like it should exist. And God's being so good to him in the midst of this difficulty. I mean, the Bible tells us that God comes close to those who are broken-hearted and crushed in spirit. That when we're dealing with those difficult moments, the one thing that we can hold on to and grab onto and know that is a promise is that God's presence will be there with us and be very real to us during those times. And yeah, it's difficult. Those times are really hard. But to persevere, to believe God's promises, to believe who you are in him, to lean into community, to lean into your faith instead of pull back from your faith, these are the things that make the difference in our lives as we process those most difficult times. And for Joseph, bad's going to go to worse. Like, he's just been forgotten. He's just been left. It didn't end the way he wanted. He hasn't seen it change the way he hoped. And yet he is continuing to persevere, and we can do that too. Let me pray for us. God, thank you that you love us, that you are committed to us, that you promise us so much. And as we process difficult moments, God, I pray that you would allow us to find a level of perseverance that we didn't even know we had, that we would find ways to grow in our faith during difficult times, that we would feel your presence in those moments in very real ways, God. We pray that you would receive glory from our lives, that we would be faithful in every season that we find ourselves in. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for being with us today, guys. Love you. Can't wait. We're going to pick the story back up next week, and we will see you then.